Gonna get some.
Punishing winds and pounding surf, the calling card of a nor'easter. The storm battered the shore overnight. The waves get rougher as the shore braces for another high tide. Good afternoon, I'm Brandon Brooks. Yuki Washington is on special assignment in Nagano, Japan.
And I'm Pat Shiraki. Our top story this noon, the damaging nor'easter. States of emergency have been declared in parts of South Jersey and Sussex County, Delaware. We started seeing signs of the storm yesterday in the Philadelphia area, but the brunt of it attacked the Jersey shore with a vengeance overnight. And a high tide this afternoon poses yet another threat. We're going down the shore and up the coast with our team coverage. We begin this noon with Robin McIntosh, who's in Avalon. Good afternoon, Rob.
Good afternoon, Pat. And as you say, a limited state of emergency exists in Avalon right now. And the reason, right behind me, there's very strong winds, this very ugly Atlantic Ocean as this nor'easter continues to blow through the South Jersey area. They call it a nor'easter. It feels more like a hurricane. One thing's for sure, they're going to be talking about this storm for a long time to come. It was a morning at the shore when you couldn't get there from here. Roads closed and covered with water in towns like North Wildwood, where only emergency vehicles could get around a landscape that had turned suddenly into a seascape, and emergency workers had their hands full.
We've had at least 3 or 4 inches inside our fire station here at 15th and Central. We just came back from a structure fire that broke out.
For residents who decided to ride out the storm, the higher the water rose overnight, the more nervous they got. Some evacuated to higher ground at shelters like this one in Wildwood.
National Guard came around and told us that the floods were going to go up 3 feet higher than they were last week, which means my entire house was going.
By mid-morning, the tides began to recede, but many neighborhoods were still underwater. This is the Ocean Drive between Avalon and Stone Harbor, still covered by water. Many residents still stranded in their homes.
Just tell them to stay put, and anybody that's in the city that's worried about their properties, they'll have plenty of time to come down and look at it. We're still in a limited state of emergency, and we request that you don't come down and, try to get on the island now.
As soon as the water levels dropped, the cleanup began, outside and inside. Even sandbags couldn't keep the water out of Jack Ferguson's real estate office in Avalon, sweeping 3 inches of bay water and ocean water out of an office closed for the day.
This is part of living on a barrier island. We just do what we have to do, close today, get ready for tomorrow, get all our vacuum suction things to suck the water out.
And we're back live now. Believe it or not, you're looking at a live picture at what is not high tide. This is still almost low tide. Still a couple hours to go before we have high tide. The wind continues to roar down here, and right now they've gone through 2 rounds of these high tides. They're waiting now for the 3rd one. That could come around 2 o'clock this afternoon. They're worried about it because the longer this wind blows, the harder it keeps that back bay water up. They're expecting more flooding in the back bays, and who knows, these barrier islands could be cut off from the mainland once again. That's a story live from a very windy, a very rainy Avalon. I'm Robin McIntosh reporting.
Well, flooding was also a big problem just north of Avalon. Stormy conditions battered the Ocean City area overnight. Roads there were literally washed out by the floods. As you can imagine, traveling in the area, almost impossible. Look at the water there. News 3's Robin Rieger had a little difficulty herself getting into Ocean City earlier today. She joins us live. Robin, how's it look now?
Well, we are on the beach right now, Brandon, in Ocean City, where I am actually being battered by wind and some water and plenty of sand here, which is blowing all over the place. You can see the ocean just churning out there. Plenty of water here in the bays and also on many of the streets, just too many to count. This nor'easter left quite a calling card. You may have the green light, but certainly not the right of way on the streets near the back bays in Ocean City.
I'm looking here. I don't think I'm even going to be able to get to my house. I'm going to have to probably walk to it.
Like Ron Merkel, most residents in the area west of Central Avenue have major flooding conditions to contend with. The second nor'easter to hit the Jersey coast in 2 weeks has almost paralyzed this community.
Trash collection isn't going to get picked up here in the city today because of the water.
While trash pickup remains questionable, schools closed along with most local businesses, and some people who wanted to work today could not.
Parked it in the back yesterday, and it's out of the water now, but I can't move it.
Bad news for Brandon, but good news for his dog, Mowgli. All right, there was one ray of sunshine in this otherwise very, very bad storm. You can see the power of it there on the ocean and the sand just blowing across the beach here. Now, they are expecting to close the Longport Bridge, which is the only access to Ocean City right now. It has been the only bridge open this morning, and it will remain open until about 2 o'clock this afternoon. They're expecting the high tides to come in about then, and they fear the water will be just too much for people to be traveling across that bridge. So expect it to be closed later on this afternoon. Officials are just asking people to please stay inside and just stay warm and dry. Do not try to venture out in this storm. That's the latest from Ocean City. We'll go back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Robin. Year-round residents at the shore long ago developed a respect for the power of nature. We're going to move up the coast now to Ventnor, just south of Atlantic City. That's where News 3's Ren Scott found homeowners in awe of the ocean, but not running from the storm.
A good 2 hours before high tide, the ocean was already pounding the boardwalk and the beaches in Ventnor, and residents anticipated the high tide still to come.
It makes you, it pretty makes you feel how insignificant you are compared to Mother Nature, you know?
Yeah. Take you out in a heartbeat, huh?
Yeah, and the wind's picking up a little bit, so it's really kicking up now.
Yeah, down here you expect to see some sizable erosion and damage?
Sizable? There's no more beach, period.
Yeah.
No more beach at all from what you could see right now, and it's not even high tide.
But few were prepared for the power that high tide would bring. For what seemed like hours, the ocean pounded at the seawall protecting oceanfront properties. Still, Bonnie Madonna said she never had any intention of leaving her house. Are you going to stay here for the night?
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
That doesn't worry you at all?
No. It's 2 o'clock in the morning now. This is high tide. It should subside in another hour.
But with 3 children asleep upstairs, Kate Dubin had a difficult night, going back and forth on whether to stay or to go.
The children are all sleeping, but we're not sleeping.
Yeah. You just stay up all night?
Probably until, starts to go back.
Yeah.
I think around 4 o'clock it will.
Yeah. When you look at your front window there, are you seeing it come up right up in the...
Oh, yeah, it splashes right up to the 2nd floor.
So now here we are at about 2:45 in the morning, and we have just gotten past the height of this last high tide. But as you stand here on the boardwalk, the waves continue to crash against this structure. It vibrates every time a wave smashes against it, and it is amazing to stand here and believe that this structure made it through high tide. And it is also amazing that these oceanfront homes made it through high tide and that the residents decided to ride out the storm. Aren't you terrified?
It's exciting.
Exciting?
Our house is well built. And the emergency management is extremely responsive, so we're okay.
In Ventnor, I'm Ren Scott, News 3.
Well, as Ren reported, residents in the Atlantic City area have been drenched over the last 24 hours, but it is not over yet. The next high tide is expected to hit between 2:30 and 3 o'clock this afternoon. News 3's Colette Cassidy joins us live from Atlantic City. Colette?
Good afternoon, Pat. Well, you can see behind me the famous steel pier. Well, that is not the main attraction today. The main attraction are these waves we are looking at. High tide officials just told me they're expecting at about 2:37. They are in a really what you would call a war room state, preparing for this second beating, while people here still are dealing with and remembering what they had to face this morning.
High winds. I mean, this wind obviously just almost blew me over, but the wind and the rain. My whole hotel room was just wet, the entire floor. It's blowing in through the windows.
Getting anywhere close to Atlantic City was almost impossible as the storm swept through the area. Highways like the Black Horse Pike closed by the overflowing back bays that kept rising in the early morning hours.
We're on 322 out there at the Comfort Inn, and we had to come over the expressway. Normally we drive the side road.
In Atlantic City and nearby Ventnor, high tide produced fast and furious waves, and by daybreak the damage was clear.
Up in the inlet area, we took some damage, and our boardwalk was damaged.
The far end of the Atlantic City boardwalk actually split open right in front of a nursing home that was just evacuated Tuesday night. The giant geotubes managed to protect most properties and businesses, but after repeated storms, many are now left exposed. Emergency management teams are working against the clock to try and put a Band-Aid on some gaping wounds before high tide comes in again in just a few hours.
We have another tidal event to go through, which will probably be very close to what we went through last night.
That means waves at sea reaching 25 feet closer to shore, crashing at 10 feet high. In the wake of this powerful nor'easter, the place that calls itself America's playground looks more like America's ghost town. Only a handful of tourists in sight.
We drove through a lot of bad weather even to get here.
WeatherScope.
Flooding, it is a major problem as a huge winter storm batters many locations along the eastern seaboard today. Rain, high wind, and heavy surf. This is the scene this afternoon in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Hello and welcome to WeatherScope. I'm Lisa Moser. We have the details, locations, live reports on location, as well as information about the snow that is being produced by this storm further inland. With all the details, here's Bob Stokes in our forecast center. Bob?
Thanks a lot, Lisa. Our concern is right through the evening hours because even though the low is pulling out toward the north-northeast, the nor'easter, it is still going to be close enough and powerful enough to continue to produce coastal erosion and coastal flooding over a good chunk of the mid-Atlantic on up to the New England coast. Now, high tide is between 2:30 and 4 o'clock this afternoon. So as this low, you can see the center here, moves slowly toward the north-northeast. That's when the strongest coastal flooding will be occurring, say along the coast of New Jersey, for example, and more flooding problems around the tidewater of Virginia, where some 5.5 to 7.5 inches of rain has already fallen. Plus, we have that strong onshore flow, which is shoving that water back in, say, the river areas and other waterways. In fact, we do have flood warnings in effect for northeastern West Virginia, east central Maryland, central Virginia, northwestern Virginia through 7 o'clock Eastern time. And so this remains a big concern, the heavy waters and the high winds out of the northeast. Now, we have two Weather Channel meteorologists out in the field. Winthrop, Massachusetts is where Kristen Dodd is, and Virginia Beach, Virginia is where Mike Seidel is. We're going to begin our report with Kristen Dodd in Massachusetts. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, Bob. Here in Massachusetts, conditions could be worse, but fortunately the area low pressure is pulling a little bit away, and we are now on the northern fringe of the storm. So we're not seeing a lot of the heavy precipitation that we had been seeing up and down the mid-Atlantic region. But what we are seeing is some biting, freezing rain and sleet as it's being carried in off the ocean with winds of 50 miles an hour. You can see what those northeasterly winds are doing to the sea. They're really stirring things up. We're seeing very high waves here in Massachusetts Bay. We're on Winthrop Beach, which is just to the east of Boston, a little finger of land that is sticking out into Massachusetts Bay. And this is very susceptible to the beach erosion as it is not very protected. It is exposed to the very strong winds. We're at a low tide period now. This afternoon, late this afternoon, when the tide comes in, we could see some more coastal flooding and some problems with beach erosion. We'll keep an eye on it for you. Now let's go down to Virginia Beach, Virginia, where our Mike Seidel has been spending several days in this storm. But Mike, what's it like today?
Not as bad as it was certainly last night and yesterday, Kristen. We still have some very strong winds, but from the north and not northeast. The worst of it was overnight as far as coastal flooding, high tide early this morning, 3, 4 o'clock this morning. And let me show you what it looked like after daylight hit in the Sandbridge area of Virginia Beach. We're talking about some very dangerous surf conditions, high water on Sandpiper and Sam Fiddler roads. You can see here cars trying to get through, but some of them getting stuck. And take a look at the surf pounding at these homes. You can see they're up on stilts. 2 homes went in last week, and you're going to see parts of both of those homes which went in last week. And today the ocean just kind of took another swath at them. And these homes are still in harm's way. We have another high tide due in all about 3:30, 4 o'clock this afternoon. And some of these homes in Sandbridge to the south of where we are by about 5 or 6 miles could be eaten up by the Atlantic. Back out live, the Virginia Beach Fishing Pier. They've opened it up. At least you can go out to the shops, not out to the end. But still some very rough surf. Waves now crashing on shore at about 7, 8 feet. High tide again in a few hours. The water is still way above where it should be for the period midway between low and high tide. And our real concern coming up later this afternoon will be in the Chicks Beach area of Virginia Beach. That's the area which faces north. If you're coming south over the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, those homes on the left, up on stilts, 3 of those were damaged considerably this morning, and we will likely have more problems this afternoon in that area. Fortunately, the heavy rain is over with. The streets are drying up, but the flooding problems continue. We'll keep you updated right from Virginia Beach throughout the event, which will likely wrap up sometime tonight. Back to you, Bob, in the studio.
Yes, thanks a lot, Mike. We look forward to your continuing updates, right, and we're concerned about that flooding and the beach erosion, of course. But we have a picture here of the northeastern coast. You can see the isobars indicative of the northeasterly winds. It's the northeasterly facing coastal regions that we're concerned with the most for more beach erosion, as the winds will be directly perpendicular to those facing areas as time goes on this afternoon. You can see the rain beginning to taper off a little bit. It's still coming down, but the heaviest amounts are over. Where in Virginia Beach, 7.21 inches. Hampton Roads, Virginia, 5.85 inches. If we had to pick a spot, it would be the Tidewater of Virginia that had the roughest flooding and the heaviest rainfall. And you can see it coming right in. And we have some freezing rain right there in the greater Hartford area, so we're concerned with that. Also, coastal flood advisories and storm warnings in effect along much of the mid-Atlantic region, going into the heavy surf advisories for much of the same territory. And again, heavy surf advisories in effect. You do have to be careful. And there's our trouble spot where we do have more winds expected here, especially right along the immediate coastline, where winds could be between 30 and 50 miles per hour. So to wrap it all up, we do have that nor'easter still plaguing much of the New England coast. In fact, the northeastern